God bless you and welcome back to the Kingdom Network Leadership Podcast with Matthew Watley. I'm your host, Dr. Darrell Williams. You know, here at the Kingdom Network Leadership Podcast, our goal is to help you be the best leader that you can be. These are conversations that will help you elevate your leadership, whether you're leading a church, whether you're leading a business, any organization, even if you're just leading your family. We want to make you the best leader you can be so that you can have the best organization you can have. Of course, joining me this week is our founder of the Kingdom Network, the Reverend Dr. Matthew Watley, and we're going to be talking about creating a healthy culture. Peter Drucker, famous business strategist, always said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. You can't do it if you don't have the right culture. So today, we're going to be talking culture with Dr. Matthew Watley. Dr. Watley, so good to have you back with us again.
Glad to be back here and excited about the subject. I'm passionate about leadership, and what I've come to discover is that leadership really always boils down to shaping culture. In fact, at the summit this year, I made the statement that I think the number one job of a pastor is to set the culture for the church. If you think about it, I mean, after all, if it's a Christian church, our goals should be the same, our mission should be the same, our values should be the same. But what's different is our approach to achieving those missions and goals and values. And that's what culture is all about. One of the things I've discovered is that culture is obvious to those who are not from there, and it's invisible to those who are around it.
So let's get a good working definition. What would you describe culture as? Because we've all heard it. We've talked about corporate cultures. People talk about the culture of the world. What is culture?
Culture is a combination of the shared values, the unofficial stuff that's not on the website. It's not in the discipline. It's not even in the Bible. It's just the way that we do stuff. Sure. It's the style, the skills, the structure. It's the way that we operate that once you get in here, you understand the great movie starring Jack Nicholson when he was playing the Marine. And while they're on the stand, they asked the question.
Few Good Men.
Few Good Men.
Yeah.
They asked the question, listen, where does it say in the manual where the mess hall is? He says, well, it's not in the manual. He says, so you're telling me you've not eaten a meal, since you've been?
I remember this.
Yeah. And he's like, yeah, no, I've had 3 squares a day. Well, how'd you find where to eat? Well, I guess I just followed everybody when it came time to eat, right? That's part of the culture. It's not in the book, but it's what we do, how we do it, right? And those things really determine the way that ministries operate. Think about it. On a Sunday morning when somebody comes to worship, they don't get to hear me preach until they've been there for at least 45 minutes to an hour.
Sure.
But they've interacted with the parking ministry, the greeters, the ushers. They've interacted with the people next to them in the pew. And so the way those people do church, the way those people greet them or don't, the way things are organized or not, says so much about the experience that person is having. That person comes, whether they realize it or not, for a vibe check. They want to know, is this my tribe? Is this my crowd? Is this the place for me? And the way that we shape culture either convinces that person that this is the spot, or it tells them, yeah, this is not your spot, before I ever get up to preach. And so I think part of the challenge of shaping healthy culture is, one, deconstructing the culture that is there that we're not even aware of. There's stuff that we do that we don't even realize we do anymore. So whenever we onboard new leaders, one of the first things I say is, hey, listen, I've been here too long. I'm nose blind. I don't smell what stinks anymore. So as a new person, I need you to show me what's obvious to you, which has now become invisible to me.
Gotcha. So you said it's a vibe check, and vibes can mean a whole lot of different things. How do you define what's a good culture for your church?
Right. So I think that, there's a leadership concept that says anything that's going to be successful must be measured. And we have, as you know, qualitative and qualitative measurements. So we can take everything from, feedback in terms of doing surveys that ask people about why they come to church, what are the things that drive them, to counting the numbers, counting how many people came, counting how much people gave, how many people served. The more we're able to sort of distill what we do into some kind of measurable standard, the more we're able to sort of unlock the key to what vibe people are experiencing when they come into our doors.
So I'm the leader of a church or a business. I'm leading something,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not new. I've been there for a while. How do I begin to dissect what our culture is versus what we think or say our culture is?
So one of the things, great question. One of the things that I like to do is to expose myself to things outside of my own environment, outside of even my own industry. So when I'm looking at church, I'm not just looking at church. I'm looking at how I'm greeted and treated when I go to a restaurant, when I go to a nice hotel. So because all those things, my daughter's playing volleyball and they have these huge volleyball tournaments, and seeing how they manage these large crowds. I'm taking note because I realize that all those things are going to help me to be more effective in our church. And so one of the things I always try to encourage people to do in whatever area of leadership they're serving in is to experiment and to expose themselves to what exists outside of their normative environment. And then take those things and experiment with them. Some stuff's going to work, some stuff's not going to work. And only when you have, here's another thing, a culture that encourages exploration and experimentation can you grow. Because experimentation assumes that everything's not going to work the first time, and that's okay. It's actually part of the process. It's the only way you discover what's effective. And so by creating an environment that is outward focused, so you're being exposed to new things, and then normalizes and legitimates experimentation, you then have the ability to push your organization to the next place.
Well, let me ask you this. Say you're a leader and you're coming into a new place, because you said one of the things you do in onboarding is ask new people to tell you about the things that you may not see anymore because you're immersed in the culture. Let's talk about the opposite of that. You're a leader coming into a new place that has its own culture and you see what's wrong. How do you begin to reshape that in a place where you see it's wrong, but they don't?
Sure. So part of, so look at Daniel. Daniel says, I alone saw the vision and the people trembled. So there's something fundamentally structurally wrong in that situation. He's seeing something because God has given him revelation. They didn't have the privilege of revelation. But there's nothing to say that as a leader, I can't show people what I've seen. And so one of the values of exposure is I can expose others as well. So just the same way.
So it's not just you taking people, not just you going, but you taking people to see
right. So because once I can show you what works someplace else, the question can no longer be, is this effective or successful? The question can only be now, can it be successful for us? And that exposure right there changes the narrative of the conversation. People do what they know.
Sure.
And even if it's not effective, they still stick with what they know, right? And so by showing people other ways that are effective, it now expands in what's called in leadership theory, it expands the shared information. Now we're operating from the same page. And we see this all the time. A leader or a pastor goes away to a retreat, goes away to some leadership conference. They get exposed to all these new models and all these new resources. They come back excited and they try to explain it to the people who didn't go and can't figure out why they don't get it. Well, they didn't get it because they didn't go where you went, right? So next time you have to make the sacrifice either to take them with you or to bring enough back so that people can see what you saw so they can go where you'd like to go.
So part of it is building in the ability for people to see the same things.
Yep.
So let me ask you this. For any culture to exist, you got to have some baseline assumptions. What tips would you give for setting the baseline assumptions for a healthy culture?
So it depends on the values of the mission of the organization. As a church, I would say that our baseline values are scripture, that we want to be a disciple-making church. And that's why I said in terms of, the mission really is not unique.
Right.
Kingdom Fellowship's mission is not unique as a Christian church.
Sure.
It's our means by which we go about achieving those missions. So whether it's your family and you're trying to figure, okay, so what's our family about? Our family is about healthy relationships. Our family is about having solid finances. Our family is about planning for the future and honoring our legacy. If those are the values of our family, then how are we living those out? How do we actualize those things? How are we going after them? And so whatever the organization is, there are some values that accrete to the bottom line of how that those individuals see themselves and how they work together to achieve that ultimate mission.
So let me ask you this. It's how they work together. What do you do? And I know this never happens in churches, but I've heard rumors from time to time that you may find some people that even though it works, you've exposed them to it, they have calcified in such a way that they are antagonistic to the culture you're trying to provide. How do you deal with that?
So let me give you a couple examples and references. The first is a quote that says that leadership is disappointing people at a rate that they can absorb, right? That literally it's saying, you wanted to do something, we're not going to do that. And because we always see change as loss, that's disappointing. And you'll probably resist what you consider to be a loss,
Sure.
right? And so I have a box for that. I don't have to take it personal. I have to internalize it. We don't have to have a battle royale, emotionally, because I recognize this is just change. And this is how we always react to change. The second thing I want to remind people is, Jesus got killed for trying to change religious people, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, you've heard it said, but now I say. They're like, yeah, I'm not really for that. Anybody got a cross available, right? So there has to be a commitment to dealing with some of the antagonism that is basic to leading people to where they never said they wanted to go, right? And that's why I always come back to when I'm going to talk about leadership, is the Heifetz quote, which says that you have to have courage,
Sure.
right? There's no model I can give you. There's no book you can read that will replace the requirement of courage to look in the eyes of people who are intent on staying where they are and saying, we're going forward. We're going forward kicking and screaming. We're going forward. We're going forward happy and loving. We're going forward. We're going forward with or without you. We're going forward. When Lewis and Clark set off for the West and realized that there was no water passage to get there, there are a number of persons who decided this is not what they signed up for. After all, they were carrying canoes. This is obviously from Todd Bolsinger's book, Canoeing in the Mountains. Yeah.
Which we will link in the show notes. You got to read Canoeing in the Mountains. Awesome book about navigating change.
Yeah, and so they're there. They're trying to get across, and they realize these canoes aren't going to help because there's no water.
There's
here.
no water here.
Yeah, and so some decided to settle there, and others continued to press forward. And when they got to the West, you know what they said? We arrived, because whoever's with us when we get there is part of the we.
Now, you just said something I think leaders have a tough time with. There may be some people who simply aren't going to make the journey.
Mm-hmm.
How do you because that's a loss, because if there are people who don't make the journey and you've got a big group, that means that some people who are going to keep going, who they're connected to, aren't going to come along. How do you create a culture that accounts for and lets people live through that type of loss, that everybody's not going to make it to the next place?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One, there has to be some replacement. So you can't just have attrition, right? Yeah. You got to be growing and drawing new people if there are some people who are saying, I'm getting off here, I'm settling here. But the second thing is, that's part of growth and success in every area of life, right? So, how much more money would MC Hammer have right now if he had cut some folks back off the payroll, right? But he tried to bring everybody with him.
Sure.
And it's too expensive. That you have to realize that as you go forward, your circle gets smaller, and you will have to learn to go it sometimes alone. Now, obviously, if you're going to go alone too long, you're going to not be able to accomplish much. But that also means you'll be able to bring in new people who have your spirit, who have the same commitment to the things that you're interested in. So when I first started as youth minister, these many, many decades ago, I had about 80 to 85% of my existing leaders quit, right? I just cast a new vision. They're very tied to my predecessor. And they're like, hey, we didn't sign up for this. And while it was a difficult short-term season, it worked out to my long-term benefit, because then again presented me with the opportunity to recruit an entirely new generation of leaders who never really been engaged before, who brought all kinds of new ideas and creativity. And I didn't have to work through all of the resistance that I would have if they had all stayed. Now, I'm not suggesting you should run anybody away from your organization, your church, your ministry, but I am saying that when folks walk out the door, God has a good way of opening a window.
Yeah, there's a part of the communion liturgy that says, as these go, let others come, that I think we often don't take seriously enough in organizational dynamics. We're busy trying to hold on to folk instead of realizing that if we release, we actually make room. We make room for folk to come in.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're making room for folk to come in, what would you give as advice for lack of a better word, onboarding, bringing people into your culture? Because if you've got new people, they're going to come with new ideas, but they may also come with new baggage, sort of well, at my last church or in my last job, this is how we did it, which may be antithetical to what you're doing. How do you kind of cleanse the palate to get new people onto the same page?
Sure, great question. So I think that one, we take Paul's advice seriously, lay hands on no man quickly, no person quickly. So we want to give people time to see who they are, see how they are, see what they bring.
So just to flesh that out. So a process, because oftentimes I think, especially in churches, we get desperate for bodies. So we start giving people authority and all sorts of stuff without a process.
Yeah.
So.
And people are inspired by vision, but they're kept through structure.
Yeah.
And so part of that process is saying, okay, so serving here is a privilege, right? So you're going to fill out an application, right? We're going to do a background check. We're going to talk to you about, the values that we hold. And this is really our culture, right? So some of those values are, we believe our witness doesn't just happen in person, but it also happens online. So you can't really be a leader in this church and just be, buck wild ratchet on social, right? Like that's not really going to work.
So Sunday you has to translate to the rest of the days?
That's exactly right.
Gotcha.
One of the things that we want to do as a ministry is to work with one another, recognizing that there's going to be conflict. There's conflict in the ministry in scripture, but we want to fight fair and we want to make up quick, and we don't want to hold on to grudges. So by naming and identifying things, we're doing a couple of things. When we're saying we're good at this, we actually know what we're doing. Right, that there's a reason we have the locus of authority, because now all of a sudden people see us as leaders because we're taking leadership seriously and providing it, right? But we're also setting a baseline for what our expectations are. We're saying it out loud versus assuming that people come in knowing who we are and what we want to achieve. And we just did this leadership training here, and it was mostly filled with people who've been serving in our church already. We thought it was important to remind them about who we are and how we operate. Because sometimes in the fog of war, you can forget what you're really fighting for.
So there's no saying that vision leaks. If you don't say it often enough, it kind of comes out the bottom of the bucket and people forget it. It sounds like you're saying culture leaks too, that if you don't continually reinforce, not just with new people, but with people who have started off doing it our way and then found their way. And now there's a lot of ways going on that you have to kind of begin to continually so it's continual reinforcement of the culture as well.
Yeah. Continue reinforcement of the culture with the eye towards always developing and growing to new things. So, one of the great definitions we've heard is tradition is frozen success. That means that at some point this made sense. This was relevant. This worked. People were excited about that. And everything that's dry now was alive and vibrant at some point. Right? And time and culture moved on. And so
every empty church building was full at some point.
That's exactly right. That's why I built it. So we have to always be careful to say, hey, listen, this is not trying to freeze a moment in time. This is about creating enough, connecting with enough of the past that we don't lose persons who've been with us, but always leaning forward to recognize that time is always evolving and that time is always moving. And if we're not moving, like like sharks, we're dying.
So if you're always moving, do you think it's important in a culture to have a culture of celebration? Because you can sort of say, okay, that's a win, on to the next one, and not give people the chance to sort of celebrate what they've done. So like you said, sometimes you can have frozen success, but isn't it important to celebrate successes as you go so that people don't get burnt out or?
Mhm. Yeah, so culture, another definition is culture is a combination of things that we allow
Mhm.
and things that we celebrate,
Gotcha.
right? So if you cut the fool, cuss folk out in the parking lot after service, and we don't deal with you, then we're allowing that. That's now part of the culture.
Sure.
We're saying, hey, you can get away with that. So it's on both sides. There's certain things we're not going to allow because they're outside of who we are. And there's certain things we want to celebrate because we want to see more of that. So we want to see more of individuals, not simply, showing up in a uniform, but taking the time to see where people are as they come in and to minister to them. We want to celebrate that. We want to identify that. We want to enlarge that and make that. There's a theory called script theory, which basically says that whenever someone comes into an organization, there are these unwritten rules that somebody within the organization begins to read people into. They give them the script of how we act here, right? And so we want to take hold and take control of that script and say, this officially is the script of this church. This is how we do it.
Well, let me ask you the one that we often don't talk about. We live in a culture that says you can't judge me, you don't get to discipline me. You said it's what we allow and what we celebrate. What advice would you give for a leader who runs into somebody who's doing something that we just can't allow? How do you successfully and lovingly deal with that?
So there are a number of approaches and methods. I want to go back to what I said earlier, which is it starts with courage.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, you have to be able to put the bully in the yard in his or her place, right? Okay. And if you're not committed to doing that, you're giving leadership over to the bully. And that ultimately is where it ends. But in order to do that, you have any number of means by which you can do it. There's coalition theory, which basically says you don't have to do it by yourself. You can do it through a group, an organization, if there's something specifically within the polity or the organization itself, an HR team or, a special group that for whom this would serve within their purview, then you can advise them, hey, this has come up. I think it's going to end this way, but please go ahead and get into it. Let me know what you come back with. Or you can have a one-on-one conversation with that individual if you feel, and of course, that's what Scripture encourages us to do, that they're open to it. If not, you can at least do it to check the box. Mm-hmm. I tried. Bring a third party into it. You'd be amazed. Sometimes people are not aware of the stuff that they do because it's normative for them. It's their culture. It's invisible to them. Mm-hmm. That's how they talk at home. That's how they talk to their kids. That's how they talk to their spouse. And so they find no problem with talking crazy to
It's the culture they're bringing with them,
exactly
which may not always be appropriate.
Yeah. And so to say, hey, listen, we don't really go for that around here. That's not really, a part of who we are. And you'd be amazed at how people may, and then ultimately, if we've worked with them individuals, if we brought a third party, if we had a group work with them, then we have to take more drastic measures. Sometimes we have to release people to their destiny. I think, we may have two different visions for how we're going to proceed forward. And since I'm already here, we may have to find another place for you to express your vision.
Take thou authority.
That's exactly right.
Indeed, indeed. So we've got a lot of theory. You told us a lot of practice. For the leader who's saying, if I do all of this work, because courage always has a cost, mm-hmm. change always has a cost, what would you say are the benefits of a healthy culture? What does it do to an organization?
So let's start with what the challenges are going to be if you don't do it.
Sure.
Challenge is going to be you're going to continue to see slow death. You're going to continue to see people get older without being replaced. You're going to continue to see resources that are diminished to meet demands that are rising. You're going to continue to see that organization wither on the vine if you don't create healthy culture. Healthy culture is just what it sounds like. So there's a whole leadership area called that basically takes biology and uses it as a metaphor for leadership growth. And the whole concept is this, that once you get healthy, there's growth that happens in a healthy organism. There are mechanisms for dealing with disease in a healthy organism. There are means for reproduction in a healthy organism. Same thing with the organization. If the organization is healthy, It's going to be reproduction. It's going to be means of dealing with disease and dissenters. There's also going to be a way to produce that which is desired. And so for us, what we discovered is that healthy culture is a force multiplier.
Gotcha.
That when people are engaged and enthused about what they're doing, it spreads. You can smell it. You can sense it. There's an air of excitement. There's an air of camaraderie. There's a esprit de corps that comes along with a culture. And the reason that's so important is it builds momentum. All of a sudden you find yourself winning on fields you didn't even realize you were competing on. All of a sudden things start coming to you.
Now, hold on a second.
Mm-hmm.
I want to dig into that. It's a force multiplier, and it sounds like you're saying it's a door opener.
Mm-hmm.
It allows you to go into places that you couldn't have gone before.
That's exactly right. So we will have members come and say, hey, my business does this. I sit on the board and they give a grant, things that we didn't advertise for, didn't recruit for, but because people are bought into the vision and see the culture as healthy, they feel like it's a place where they want to contribute and want to be connected. Who doesn't want to be a part of a winning team?
Sure.
And you can walk into any locker room and within 30 seconds, you know whether it's a winning team or not by the spirit, the culture within that locker room, right? When there's strong camaraderie, when there's argumentation, people are not arguing when they've accepted we're just going to lose, right? And so if you look at the Chiefs, last year, let me finish this Chiefs thing. So if you look at the Chiefs mid-season last year,
sure,
they were at each other's throats.
They were.
Mahomes yelling at folks and they fighting on the sideline and the coach is bumping Travis. So when later on in the Super Bowl, when Travis bumps him, like, yeah, that happened before, right? But it was a group of guys saying, we're winners, we're not winning, and we're not going to accept not winning, mm-hmm. right? And so that's part of their culture. That's why you have a head coach. The head coach is not sitting there working with the linemen. They got coaches for that. His job is to make sure that the culture of that locker room is all pointed towards the same direction winning.
Now, I think you interrupting because you said something
good. I got you good.
Yeah. Anyway, you said something good in there. You said plenty of good stuff, but oftentimes we'll think of a healthy culture as one that is stable and quiet. There's not a lot of conflict or mess going on. But you're saying a healthy culture ultimately has some conflict built into it.
Yeah, it has to if it's going to get better. You need to have voices from different people who view things in different ways, or you have to assume that there's one person who's the sum of all wisdom. Right. And so you have to create, part of the culture is creating an environment where people feel free to express out of the box ideas, challenge the norms, challenge what already has been accepted as these things are sacred cows and can't be touched. Somebody has to be able to raise their hand and say, hey, does anybody know why they can't touch that? Because it seems like it needs to be touched. It needs to be removed, right? And when you have that environment, that is the sort of self-correcting course correction that allows an organization to move forward. But when all of a sudden, all these options are off the table mm-hmm. because somebody somewhere at some point said these things can't be touched, you have limited options. And whenever you have limited options, it shrinks what is possible for that organization.
So conflict expands the plate, or healthy conflict, because we've all seen bad cultures where it's just we fighting for the sake of fighting, which is very different than, listen, we're fighting for something instead of fighting against each other.
That's exactly right. Exactly right.
So culture makes the difference.
Culture makes all the difference. Peter Drucker was right. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. At the end of the day, doesn't matter what your vision is, how wonderful, how aspirational, how realistic. At the end of the day, if you don't have a group of people, because at the end of the day, business ministries are all just people. They're groups of people committed to doing something. And if that commitment is low, if that commitment is not clear, if that commitment is dysfunctional, then all those things are going to show up down the road in the process. And it's going to limit what that group of people is going to be able to do. But if you can keep it healthy, if you can keep a spirit of camaraderie and commitment, sacrifice, and sharing, then you're going to have a bunch of folks running real fast toward what they've agreed is the common goal. And that thing right there, one can chase 1,000, two can put 10,000 to flight. It's literally a scriptural force multiplier.
And I think we've got it. Listen, everybody, this was great. Culture matters. If you don't get the culture right, you can't move the rest of it forward. As always, I want to thank you, Dr. Watley, for being with us and sharing from the vast font of wisdom and what you know about football. So we thank you for it. Everybody listen, here at the TKN Leadership Podcast, we want to help you go further. We want to help you get your leadership to the next level, which means you've got to get your culture right, which means you've got to get yourself right. To get yourself right, maybe you want to not just listen to the podcast, but you want to become a part of our TKN community. To get more information about our TKN community and to be a part of our TKM Leadership Network, go to tknleadership.com. Also, Pastor Watley, where can people find you on social to get some more of this information and more wisdom that you share?
So I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook under my name, Matthew Watley, and it'll be picture looks just like me.
And I guess that's it. Everybody, thank you for joining us. Make sure you join us again next time for the TKN Leadership Podcast.